Hey guys, just wanted to bring you a video regarding the state of Android in the year 2025. Obviously, Android's come a long way from the first beginnings, and obviously the two common big phone tiers on the United States obviously is on the left side you got Samsung S25 Ultra, right side Pixel Pro XL, Google. And we see there's two completely different operating systems. Obviously, turn on the lock screen, you see different wallpapers, different settings, different way to set up. Obviously, everyone has their own flavors or, preferences on operating systems. Obviously, the most big operating system we have here in the United States is iPhone OS, which is what is recording this video currently on iPhone 16 Pro. Put passwords in real quick. As we've seen, home screen, even the home screen's pretty much, obviously, Pixel OS has come a long way back from its original Android OS. And obviously Samsung has their own touch flavor how they operate things. Obviously these phones have their pros and cons like everything else. There's no perfect phone. Obviously if there was a perfect phone, everyone would be using it. Well, obviously a lot of people like the iPhone for that reason, because iPhone just keeps it simple. And it's not to, say it's good or bad. Some people prefer that. People, that's for the most reason people use iPhones these days. It's just might be boring to some people, especially if you use Android like myself. I use Android and iOS, but preferably I use iOS because of, obviously, like everyone knows, iMessage. But other people prefer, this customization which Android gives you and iOS doesn't really give you as much as of to do. But the thing about iPhones is, just pick up an iPhone, everyone knows how to use it. Might be boring, might be lame, but hey, you just pick it up, and it's common. The common thing, obviously, Android, you have different OSs, different things how they look like. Obviously, I have things customized here to a particular way. I have it, and some phones have better things than others. Like in this case, there's the top two tiers you would say right now in the United States for Android phones. Obviously, everyone's can make a case for any other not operating system, but brands such as OnePlus or some people are like Sony fans. Obviously, those are smaller companies that they don't become popular. Obviously, they say Samsung and Google are the big ones. Mostly Samsung because they advertise everywhere, they market it, And obviously, Google's moving up there. Recently, for example, I use Pixel as my primary phone for a couple of weeks, and I would say, the Pixel is probably the closest. If I were to tell someone who's using an iPhone right now, wanted to try Android, I most likely would tell them to use a Pixel, because the Pixel, it's as close. You don't have that much, fiddling to do with it. There is, you could customize it, but it's straightforward. Like all the system, the OS, it's nice and smooth. Obviously, Pixel has a lot of, it doesn't have everything what Samsung used to do. Even today, where Samsung used to throw everything in their software. Back in the TouchWiz days, you used to have all these features and little things they would throw on it. Obviously, they're taking things away, as we could see even with the most recent phone releases, like in the Flip 7 and the Fold 7, which are really good phones, but still deciding, like many people are gonna, pre-order theirs already, but I'm still on the fence of it because, obviously it's made it thinner. It's a nice thing, but obviously, like Samsung always does, for the most part, they take things away. In this case, obviously on the Fold, they obviously, it's a good topic, but they took out this, with the, let me get this out real quick. Take this out. S Pen. Obviously, it's not on integrated phone. That's a lot of people are like, oh, it's cool that they took it out, but not a lot of people use it. But it's good to have. It's always good to have an option. Option. You remember, I forget what generation it was, but a couple of years ago, Samsung did it with the S series, with their Ultra series. They took out the S Pen, and what happened? Everyone complained. Now you have it again. And like they said, I obviously not these really concrete, but there's already rumors going again for the next series that they're going to bring back. They're going to bring back the S Pen, which is, it makes you kind of think like, oh, well, they kind of know that, a lot of people weren't going to be happy regarding that. that feature being taken away. But people use it. Obviously, I had a Fold 6. I bought that S Pen case and I was using it. It's cool to have, because ideally before the Note 7 came out, and I even thought about it, I'm like, obviously I use the iPhone, I was leaning, before obviously the news came out to, just full on Android and everything. I carry two phones, one iOS and one Android phone. iOS being my primary and the Android being my secondary. But I was contemplating of making the Android the primary, making the iOS secondary, because I was thinking, cool, I'll make the Fold 7 my primary, if I want to, fiddle, edit photos or videos, I just use the S Pen, or the case, the S Pen case when if they would have had it. And to do that and just use the iPhone, to be the camera phone, camera phone, my secondary phone. Obviously people later say, well, Android phones have good cameras. And I could tell you for sure, like they say, everything has pros and cons. Pixel, point and shoot, excellent. It's like far none. The only bad thing I noticed with Pixel, and I had it since it came out, and I used it to travel a couple times. One of the things Google still hasn't figured out, and I don't know. Like I said, it might be engineering or software. Most likely it's more a hardware issue. It depends, like this is not everyone might have this issue, but when you use night photos and lens flare, that's really common. iPhones had that for an issue for a while. Obviously, Apple's always fiddle around with their lenses and their coatings and stuff to get that kind of sorted out. But one of the biggest things I've seen on the Pixel 9 when I used it for photos when I went traveling a couple months back was the lens flare. And obviously daytime photos, anything when there's not that much, obviously lights, the lens flares, it's beautiful photos. Click and shoot, and you'll get the best photo. That's what they always, even the Pixel and the A series phones are always ranked the highest compared to any other phone because of their, the point and shoot capabilities. Samsung, don't get me wrong, Samsung obviously they've been doing it. They're 200 megapixels. They throw all the pixels they want. They've been optimizing their software over the years much better. But sometimes, like they say, it's not always about the, doesn't mean because you could put a 500 megapixel camera, but if your software is not good to optimize the 500 megapixel photos, you won't, there's no point to having 500 megapixels or 200 megapixels. So obviously they did that with the Fold 7, they put 200 megapixels because obviously they want to make that's the standout feature to make bigger numbers, catch people's attention. But obviously, always the software and hardware they have to play together nicely. If you don't, there's no point in having that much resolution added just thrown in there. Even back in the day, if you guys remember when HTC used to make their HTC phones, they used to they didn't have 5 megapixels in the beginning. They had that like their 4 megapixel ultra pixel, whatever these. Obviously it was bad. You could tell, eventually you have to move it, you have to upgrade it, because even iPhones when for the longest had like the 8 megapixel camera or 5 megapixels when they first came out, the 8, and they started little by little adding in pixels. And there's so much you could do with pixels, obviously, but you got to have the good software. And obviously with the iPhone, for the most part, with the iPhone, you could, most part, click and shoot, you get decent photos. I'm not going to say, some of them are bad. You can make it, like I said, you can make for any of these three phones, you can make a argument which one is the best. Obviously, Pixel, point and shoot, pretty much, you're going to get solid photos all the way around. Unless you, like I said, you run into situations where you have lens flare. Samsung, and S25 Ultra, actually been surprised with the quality, especially with they upgraded the ultra wide lens to the new upgraded pixels on it. It's been pretty solid shooter. Honestly, the only thing about Samsung that we always people always brought, and I always say that's still gonna be there, I don't know what it is. Most likely a software issue, and I always try to say, Android, like to me, it's like they say that these phones compared to back in the day when Samsung used to make their phones that were really like you say, there was lag to it. The OS is kind of toned down now, but like they said, the photo issue is when you get that it's the slow shutter. When you want to do that quick and shoot. Sometimes sometimes you obviously you could download these other apps. They have these new apps called Camera Assistant where you could fiddle around in where is it? Camera Assistant. You could mess around with it, shutter speed and stuff like that, but I feel like, I don't know, it has to be something, Samsung has to work on. They obviously release these apps to try to help it out, but, I think, not we, but I think that, they could do more, obviously to be, one of the better cameras, because I even the really good rear cameras. Like a lot of people are saying the front camera, Pixel. Pixel has some of the best front cameras as well. iPhone's pretty solid. Like I said, iPhone's I'm not gonna. They have really good. It's a hit or miss. You could like I said, you can make an argument for any of these phones cameras to be the top, or and every photo different scenario. One camera could do better than another. I would say software could dictate the algorithm of the photo and all that stuff. Going to video, obviously, like I said, if you want to just click and shoot it, like a lot of people today's world, unless you're professional, editor, or how to tweak around apps or how to tweak videos and stuff like that, I would have to say for the most part is iPhone. It's just straightforward. It's always been a strength of Apple. The video. People, you just, like I'm doing right now, you just pick it up. For the most part, it might not be the best, to some people, but you just pick it up, video shoot, and for the most part, as long as you know how to hold the camera and know how to fiddle around a little bit, you're gonna get decent video quality, and obviously if you edit it, it's gonna come out phenomenal. You'll be able to pull off some good footage out of it. Second one, I'll probably say that under these two phones right now in front of me, I use both for video recording, and I still got to, in this case, I would say Samsung. Pretty much I would say Samsung, or where like the same case scenario where you just pick up the phone, just go video mode and just record. And if you want to tweak it, you can tweak it a little bit at the end later on if you want to. If you know how to do that, fiddle around with it a little bit. Yeah, it's gonna be Samsung. Google, don't get me wrong. I used this, I think, like a couple weeks ago, actually at the zoo. Let me see if I can find a video. I used that video boost feature for the first time. Let's see. And put it on the value because I don't want it to, Let me get this one out of the way real quick so I can show you guys. And let's see, right here. So obviously the software, like I said, it's always hardware and software for the most part that you want to put together to try to make the camera work together and have try to do the best. Let's see what's going on here. Trying to get something decent out of it. You know what? Oh, there we go. Let me connect the Wi-Fi because I'm gonna do those. Okay. Obviously they came out with a video boost feature for the Pixels. So, like for example, I used this, there's a little example. I was at the zoo, decided to try it out. Only thing about video boost is, like they said, it has to be uploaded to a Google Cloud or, their servers for them to kind of boost the the quality, or, you optimize the video to its best, quality. But obviously it's not on device, is not doing this work on device, is doing it on the cloud. So you have to wait for it. A lot of people, it depends. If you want to wait to upload this video to whatever you decide to upload it to your social media, or if you're just gonna upload it for to share in a different app, you could wait. And it's good video. Don't get me wrong. But then, like I said, at the end of the day, it's not where you could just automatically, like in the Samsung, for pretty straightforward, you could just record it, upload it, and they'll be good quality, Going to their, like I said, pretty straightforward. Obviously, every operating system has their own way of doing things. Pixel's pretty straightforward. One of the things I always like about the Samsung is obviously you have a little more options to tweak around the camera. You have all these options compared to Pixel's updated. Obviously, they changed it up a little bit. The only thing I always didn't like about for some reason, just minor nitpicking. Like I said, everyone has preferences. Everyone could say, "Oh, he's just being picky." Like for example, when you wanna, like in a Samsung, right, video mode, it has an auto flash. Simple things. Like I said, it's not picky. It's just me. Sometimes, because I don't like, having it on. But sometimes, your flash, you have an option to have it automatically turn on when it detects it's nighttime. Like on the iPhone. iPhone, same thing. But on the Pixel, it doesn't have that. It's either gonna dictate that it wants, night mode, or you have to manually always turn on that flash mode. Obviously, that's just a nitpick, but for the pretty most part, every operating system has their own way they handle their photography. You have features, you have Pro Mode, obviously that's more recent. Pro Mode, Samsung's always had, we have Pro Video, Pro Mode, you have all these other things, in Food Mode. But like I said, everyone has preferences. Everyone's gonna, likes their photos a certain way or video a certain way. But for the most part, like I said, you can make a case for each of these phones being the top camera phone. To me, perfect phone will always, I always you hear all these, big content creators talking about the perfect phone. To me, the perfect phone would be this phone, S25 Ultra. If I could, S25 Ultra, like I said, if you guys remember back in the days, they used to have the Google Play Edition phones. This phone, if you can make this phone a Google Play Edition S25 Ultra, that would be, that would be the perfect phone right there. You have great hardware, and you have the Google software. And then people say, well, why do you want Google software? Why would you want that? Well, a lot of people forget, Google software, you have all this stuff. You have call assist, scan detection, hold for me, direct my call notes. So all these little Google features are really, really helpful. Little, obviously Samsung tried bringing their own version of little things, but it's not the same as Google. They don't have that. Remember, Google's been doing this for years. Google's been doing all this background, software and all these. They have they have the experience. They have all this database to do all these things. Back from Google Maps days. That's when even on my iPhone, also most of the apps I use besides the main, everything's a Google app. I use Google Maps. I use Gmail. It's always been Google's. Obviously they've been good or bad. They have they have all this data for information they gather from us, and they're able to bring up all these useful call spam. I like that because especially in today's world, you get all these scam detection, all these bots, especially with these AI. They're getting smarter with these things, and Google knows how to do those little small things. Obviously Samsung has all these little useful features and tweaks and stuff like that. You have secure folder, you have all these little things, like all these apps and options. But like I said, it's always an extra. People say they like, but the only thing, for example, I prefer the Google calculator compared to the Samsung. But you can't, some of the apps are repetitive. The calendar, I had to delete the Samsung one because I like the Google one better. There's certain apps you gotta look around. There's apps they're better. Obviously visual voicemail, all stuff like that. I feel that Google does a little better. Like I said, don't get me wrong. Samsung has a lot of useful features in their operating system. The double tap. You have they still have some of the old school stuff when they used to keep your eyes on the screen, to keep the screen on, kind of things like that. But for the most part, if I could have a S25 with even if I had to pay Samsung came out like, because everyone wants to make their money. Everyone wants to make. If I had to pay $50 to $100 to pay Samsung to be able to unlock without losing the features, because once you tweak a phone, you don't, back in the day we used to add ROMs, you could still use things, but little by little, obviously for security reasons, they start locking down features like Google Play and Google Pay and stuff like that. Certain apps you weren't able to, your bank apps and stuff like that. So if if Samsung really wanted to, cool, if you want to charge people $50 to $100 to sideload or to officially have like a Google version, a Google OS, make this sort of like a new era 2025 model, Google Play Edition. That'd be perfect, because you have the Google software and it's just straightforward, and that's, pretty much, people like straightforward things. Obviously, if you like to tweak things, all that, cool, you can use the Samsung OS, and you use their software, but I would prefer this OS on this phone, Don't get me wrong, the hardware on this one, it's nice, like I said, it's a good hardware, don't get me wrong. Obviously, the Samsung hardware is beautiful too. You can't go wrong with either or, but I like this material better. It feels much more easier on the hand to hold, especially for being this big compared to the Pixel. Don't get me wrong, it's a good hold. You can hold it on the hand still, but I just feel I like the material used on this phone better. Obviously, in the back cameras, different layered different layer setup. But it's just everyone has preference. There's no such thing as for someone a perfect phone. Every phone, like for example, the iPhone's good material as well. But it's just your preference, what you want to use, how you feel comfortable using the phone. Obviously, different technologies. Obviously, the anti-glare screen on the Samsung is beautiful. I don't know why they didn't bring that on the S. Correction, the Z Fold 7. It's an expensive phone. I always told I always believe the most expensive phone. If you're charged that much, you should add everything. Those are the phones you should throw everything, even the features you think people are not gonna like. Like back into the old Samsung days when Samsung used to throw everything in the phone. That's what the Z series should stand for. Besides, obviously the Z, the Flip series are kind of more like it depending on so much you could do with the hardware, But for sure, the Z Fold 7 should have had that anti-glare screen. It's unless you use the anti-glare screen, and people are gonna say, oh, it's just an anti-glare screen. You could buy a screen protector or one of those screen on Amazon. But why waste my money if you could just put it on the phone? I don't, they could have added it on the front screen of at least in the Z Fold 7. They didn't have to add it to the interior screen. But just add it. Good to add. Don't get me wrong, Pixel screen is beautiful, AMOLED. Only thing like I said, everything has its pros and cons. Let me get this closer. I'm not really fond of the not screen protect, the fingerprint reader. Samsung has the best one. I could literally go here and right away off the bat. Obviously, right now I have extend lock, so it won't really activate it. But when I really need to use the fingerprint. Sometimes I have to fiddle around with it, and especially right now, I have a screen protector on. I have a screen protector on both. But yeah, obviously you have to go back into the settings, and I've done that a couple of times, and sometimes I still have to recalibrate it because it's not perfect. Obviously, I'm assuming with it, that's we're less than a month away from the next series coming out, and hopefully in the next series, the Pixel 10, they do improve that fingerprint sensor, because it's good, obviously, before compared with what they used to have before. It's always improvement is always better, but it's not as good as Samsung. Obviously, Samsung screens, they make the screens for everyone else. Even iPhones, the iPhone I'm using right now to record it, it's Samsung. Samsung's like they said, they're the big dog on the OLED technology. Everyone wants their screens for a reason. Obviously, all three phones I'm using right now. Another thing that's probably different from all of them, it's chipset. You have Tizen, correction, not Tizen, Tensor. You have the Google Tensor chip over here, and you have obviously the Qualcomm, the Snapdragon, the big dog over here, and then you have I'm recording Apple's Pro chips. I gotta say I've been used to Qualcomm. Qualcomm's obviously been a big hit or miss. Obviously they Qualcomm back in the day, remember, they used to have a lot of issues too with their phones. Back in the day, like any company, even iPhones, when they first came out with their own chips, they weren't perfect. The Tensor chips improved this year. I had last year's Pixel, and there was a lot of issues where it would overheat. There were issues with the apps where lag. You would notice that jitter compared to using a Qualcomm chip. But it's improved a lot this year. Like I said, I used this phone like when I went to the zoo. I was recording for the most part, and I was doing that video boost feature for the most that day. The phone never gave me any issues, and I was using it in the sunny San Diego day. I was in San Diego when I was using it, and it was a sunny day and warm day too. No issues. I was able to upload the footage. I was recording nonstop photos. Like I said, I have I have a lot of. Let me see. A lot of photos. I took all these photos right here from that day and from the zoo. No issues, no overheating warnings, nothing like that. The screen was bright. It would kick in. Obviously, battery. I can't recall the battery. But it got me through the day. No issues. It didn't like completely die, but it didn't get too warm. It was warm, but it didn't get uncomfortably warm. For obviously, like I said, I was using all the features: 4K, video boost. And the sunny San Diego sunlight. No issues. What's it called? Qualcomm obviously has improved. Like I said, Like right now, this S phone, the S25 Ultra, no issues at all. Um, Obviously, the only thing I still kind of, and it's weird. Like I said, it's a weird thing. I'm going to it. Obviously, I'm here in the LA, so LA is different. Like I said, every market is different. Everything is always dependent on where you live and how you use your phone. Everyone's different. Everyone doesn't, record 24/7, 4K or full screen, brightness and traveling and stuff like that. Or, but for the most part, it's hard. Qualcomm's been really good. Obviously, they're not as good as the iPhone chips, but don't get me wrong, the iPhone chips, especially, I have noticed the last two generations of the iPhone, I've been having more heating, not overheating, but I've noticed that, the chips do get warmer, and with a lot of excessive use, you do kind of notice that little, cool down. You got to cool down the iPhone a little bit. And then even though they're using Snapdragon modems, on their iPhones still, how they said iPhones come, Apple's most likely producing their own cellular antenna chips and stuff like that. I don't know why, but this year I feel that it's funny because, like I said, it's interesting. Like I said, it could just be me where I live, or it's just, it might be might be people that say it's a bad iPhone or bad Samsung or bad Google phone. Obviously, I had no issues with reception. This is going on Verizon. This is T-Mobile right now. I live in a part of LA where the reception not the best, but T-Mobile is pretty much straightforward here. T-Mobile and AT&T are the ones that have the best signal coverage here. People could say in Verizon, LA. I guess it's all dependent. Everything's all dependent. For the most part, T-Mobile's up their game here. See, this is Verizon. It crapped out on me right now. And obviously, I live in a kind of fringe area, so like you can see this 4G signal here, and obviously the same thing. LTE's 4G is the same thing. But this is gonna be interesting. People might have the same experience, but I think the Pixel has a better antenna than the iPhone 16 Pro. iPhone 16 Pro, I have a harder time sometimes, especially like in this area. Obviously, the iPhone's connected to Wi-Fi right now. But if I were to use the iPhone right now to just do the same speed test, it will have a harder time trying to connect. It'll connect to the cellular network, but it'll crap out sometimes. It would give me issues. I said it's just Verizon. If I were to switch the chips around, it's just a Verizon thing. Verizon here's, like I said, it's not its strongest point. Probably other parts of LA is good, but not here. For the most part, T-Mobile is improved. But yeah, coming back to the network performance on their chips. Obviously, top dog is always going to be Qualcomm. Any phone that uses a Qualcomm chip. Obviously, don't get me wrong. Let's go back. Like I said, not every phone. Like I said, it could just be a fluke on my iPhone. But for the most part, any phone with a Qualcomm in their modems, straightforward. This one no issue at all. The Samsung phone, this is no issue with the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and none of that, because those modems, the Qualcomm modems are really good. Tensor modems improved a lot. Whatever they're using, obviously, I think it's the Samsung modem or something, but it's improved a lot compared to back in the day. Because I remember when I had the Pixel 7, I was one of those people. A lot of people would complain about how the phone used to lose signal. You had to restart it, and a lot of people thought it was a software issue. It ended up being just the modem. The modem issue. It could have been a little of both. It could have been a hardware and a modem issue. Where the antennas. When we all know that from back in the day when the iPhone used to have that issue. Was it the iPhone 4 series when you couldn't hold it from the side a particular way, or else you're cut off your own reception. But yeah, this is a good chip this year. It's don't get me wrong, it's not gonna be the benchmark king or all that, but if you use this phone every day, straightforward, smooth, nothing. Obviously, always OS dependent too, because if you're depending on your OS. Talking about Pixel 10 Pro already coming out. It's always OS dependent, how you use your phone. Everyone uses their phone for simple things, might have only 2 apps or 3 apps, or you might have 500 apps to use, or you might have apps that are really GPU intensive. And then if you're really GPU intensive, that you need, the phone to be always smooth on this, yeah, you're gonna have to go with not the S25 Ultra, but a Qualcomm chip. You know, because you have like phones like the OnePlus, they have the Qualcomm chip, and they're really, you know, that's a really good phone too. You know. And there's other operator. Obviously, we're here in the United States. Obviously, a lot of people like to say, "Oh, you know, you have a lot of these international phones, Xiaomi and stuff like that." But it always comes back. People, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Those phones aren't really good specs, but it comes back to support. You know, so much support you get. Obviously, if you know how to tinker around with you're a good tinker and stuff like that. You know how to get around, get your way around on tinkering. Yeah, one of those phones obviously probably better than all the phones we have right now. But then it always comes back to also, network. So much. Someone at AT&T might not be able to use those phones. Verizon, or you do, if you can't use it, you're kind of locked, minimized to how much, network performance you'll get out of it. Might only get 4G, might only get 3G, or obviously some places you still only get an edge, or, wherever, depending what you have, you might only get 2G, but obviously those phones, same thing. If something happens to your Xiaomi phone or your Oppo phone, even Sony, because Sony doesn't even sell phones here in the United States as much. Your support, if you need customer service, is going to be really really limited. Even with these phones, it's still hard. It's kind of interesting, like they say, people buy, the other reason people would just buy iPhones is because you can just go to any Apple store, depending where you live. Like I said, you might live somewhere there's no Apple stores, or there's a different way things, but for the most part, you could just go to an Apple store, and the Apple store will pretty much solve your issue on the spot, depending. And, like I said, it could be depending when you have. Like I said, I'm using the iPhone 16 Pro for this recording, but that's like my primary phone. But I never really had issues with the iPhone. When I ever did, I remember I would go to Apple Store. The only times I gone, I think I was having a battery issue one time, and on the spot, they did a warranty swap. Literally went in, did the diagnostic. Like, oh yeah, their thing shows up there was an issue. They're like, oh, you know what? Let's just swap out your phone. Went to the back, grabbed me a, like I said, brand new phone. Grabbed me refurbished phone, but Apple's refurbished quality is top tier. It's legit. Like, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Obviously, they bring in that little white box. That's the only way you could tell it's the refurbished phone. But and they give it to you on the spot. They do, obviously, if you depending on. In this case, it was I have Apple Care Plus. Obviously, every Apple Care Plus, you have to pay a deductible depending what kind of issue you have. But in this case, they deemed it to be under the warranty issue, so they just swapped out the phone. They transferred oh, you need to log out my phone. They asked me if I needed to switch my data. They wanted to help. I literally just logged into my iCloud, and I had everything on the cloud, quick and easy. And I walked out with the brand new one. I'm gonna say brand new phone, brand new refurbished phone, off the spot. Compared to these phones, depending, like I said, everything's dependent. Some people might have preferences, but obviously Google on this, like at this phone, I didn't get no Google Care. I got this one from T-Mobile, so I don't want to pay. Like, I never had it broken my phones, or I never lost my phones, so I never. For this phone, I didn't get no warranty at all. Like I said, a lot of credit card companies have warranty. Not warranty, but they do help you out if you do break your phone. So do pay with. Look into your credit card company, see if they offer that. But obviously, there's a deductible to it. But never for these phones. The only phone I do have the warranty, because like I said, I have positive experience, and it's hard to beat the Apple Care. But for the Android phones, like the Pixel, obviously, if you get it direct from Google, you get their Google, whatever, Preferred Care or whatever they call their version it is. Or obviously, carriers have their own version, but they're freaking expensive, And any carrier, like I said, this is a Verizon and T-Mobile, they all have like their third party, or even like Samsung. Samsung, they have, Ubrake, Fix, wherever they call it, that company, or a Sirion, or wherever they have the Care Plus, their Samsung Care Plus, but it's not the same as the Apple, there's still a turnaround to it. You still got to go to a store or find a store, and they're not as, obviously they kind of beefed up their presence. You go Best Buy and stuff like that, try to open up, but still, you still got to go to make an appointment or go to the store. It's not like on the spot. Even Apple, you do have to, someone, for the most part, you have to make an appointment, but for the most part, you go to an Apple store, pretty straightforward, and get a same day appointment, or off the bat, you walk in, they might assist you right off the bat to take care of your issue. But for these two phones, they still got to improve their that presence, because obviously they have Samsung stores here, and depending where you live. Like I said, I live in LA, so in LA we have a Samsung store. not close by, but it's a distance away. But it's not the same as the Apple Store. I gone there a couple of times, so it's different. Like I said, don't get me wrong. That's good. It's always good for improvement is always a good thing. And obviously, Samsung's been beefing it up. And so I was saying thing with Google. Google's been bringing out Google stores, which is always good. It's always good to have competition. Always good to bring that because obviously, as a consumer, you want those options because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you got to spend money, and especially the companies want you to spend money with them, they should offer those things. But for the most part, never the issue with the Apple and Apple Cares. That's why a lot of people, like I said, that might be a reason why people use iPhones because they get that quality. They know that. Like I said, it's not perfect. That some people, some could say that they never had a positive experience with Apple Care. But for the most part, Apple Care or even just not Apple Care, just getting assistance on one of these phones is much better with the Apple and their not only the iPhone, they're just all their products. You get pretty straightforward assistance at the store. Yeah, so that's a good thing about that's a good thing about having choices. And another thing I like to the only reason it's hard to leave iOS and it's pretty. I tried. Don't get me wrong. I tried it. I haven't tried don't get me wrong. I have to try the Ultra Watch, whatever they call it. Like I tried the Pixel Watch 3, and the only reason it's hard to leave iOS, and it's I guess since I started using it just depends. Like I said, everyone has their own preference and stuff like that. It's this thing. Here you go, Apple Watch Ultra. It's hard. Well, not just in general, Apple Watch. It doesn't have to be the Ultra, but it's just the Apple Watch. Like I said, there's always that ecosystem thing that comes to these phones too. Obviously, with the iPhone, you have the Apple Watch, you have the Macs, you have iPads and all that. But the watch is the hardest one to leave. Obviously, you can use an iPhone. I mean, a Google Pixel with the Apple Watch, but you gotta not have it connected and stuff like that. But it's better to have it all connected. That ecosystem thing. And it's just hard because the apps on the watch are they just work straightforward. I use the Pixel Watch, and for example, I'm not a super athlete or workout freak, but like for example, when I go to the gym and I run in a treadmill, I remember when I was using the Pixel Watch 3. Like I said, unless you know how to filter around, but for the most part, consumer, unless you, like I said, you know how to tinker with phone things and settings and stuff like that. There's no straightforward. Like for example, there's no straight. Let's go. This is my one thing that I didn't like about it. Just simple indoor walk or run. I couldn't find out on a Pixel Watch, and obviously I did search, and obviously there's settings you had to you could change it in the app to use. What is it? The Fitbit app. But you got to look for it. It's not something you just click in like this. You just click it. And you have all these options for these workouts, and you can even add workouts. And another thing I had an issue with the Pixel, this is just Pixel Watch. Obviously, I haven't used the newer Samsung, but I could go to my prior experience with older Samsung watches was the accuracy. When I was running a treadmill, it was not accurate at all. It was really and I was looking at the same thing. You have to tweak around settings. I looked on Reddit. I looked at Google search. To see if any other people are having the same issue. And it is somewhat a common issue with the Pixel Watch. And you have to fiddle around with the Fitbit settings to get it kind of optimized to calculate your right footsteps and stuff like that. And your what's it called? Like your stride, your running stride, for example. And I found out to be kind of it shouldn't be that complicated. It should be easy. And like I said, that could be just a iOS thing where iOS you literally just click and like I said, you just click and pick and it works. Obviously, this is some people might like to tweak around the things on the watch, but obviously, an Apple Watch is the hardest hardest thing to let go. When I was using the Pixel, I was using a Pixel Watch 3. Okay, I was using Pixel Watch 3. That's the only reason I told you it was hard because and it's like little apps I use and I like using. One of the apps I like I said, is always and it always goes back to operating system, app optimization. All that for the most part, all the apps on iOS are optimized pretty well for the phones and all the phones and all the hardware, iOS hardware, Apple Watch and all that. Like example, I use the Nike Run app on Apple Watch is really good. You have so many, obviously, because a lot of people forget Nike is somewhat not owned by Apple, but they kind of have like that. I think I want if I want to, might not be correct, but if I remember correctly, Apple has some sort of stake in Nike. So obviously, Nike's more Apple oriented, and then compared to other companies. So that's why a lot of you see that Nike Apple always that collaboration. A lot of things it's not as obvious, but you do see it. But like I was going to the apps, like on the Nike Run app on the. You have so many options on the watch, the Apple side. When I did it on the Pixel, it was limited. Like it was really limited, and it took them a while to even bring out the app. If I remember reading, because I remember back in the day when you had the the watch, Galaxy Watch 3 or something like that. It was hard to get certain apps. And they were like obviously iOS app always gets the good apps. Not the good, but most of the apps first. But on the even right now, like I said, on the Pixel Watch, when I was using the Pixel Watch 3, pretty limited on the options you had to work out and stuff like that. But on the Samsung, I haven't used their watch, but I've seen videos, and then for the most part, like I said, I remember the last time I used a Samsung watch, I feel like I said, there might be a good reason behind it, but I feel it's too cluttered for their, it's a little still too cartoony for my taste. Their OS on their watches. Like I said, it's a preference thing. Everyone has preferences. Everyone goes, people are like, oh, I might like it because you can customize all this. And don't get me wrong, you can. You can customize a lot of things on that Samsung watch. You have themes and all that. Like even on these phones, you get themes. But it's, where they sometimes try to market it as a workout. You see it always. Obviously now they have the classic watch again. But for the the Ultra, they try to market it as an Ultra, but it's still, like I said, Apple. For sure, Apple has the lead on the smartwatch series in that category for a while, and it's gonna be a while until these. Because even if you look at the app, the Galaxy Watch, it looks pretty much the same. Don't get me wrong, Apple does the same shit too. Apple does the same shit, and pretty much all the watch series look the same. But their software, it's really good. Their watch OS software is really good. But I'm hoping, hopefully in Pixel 4 watch or whatever they call it, hopefully, because like I said, we're less than a month away from, the next Pixel series. Obviously, we're less than a week away than the Fold 7. Like I said, I'm thinking of getting the Fold 7, but I'm really, to be honest, I'm more leaning towards waiting for the Pixel 10 Pro Fold, what they might call it, whatever they call it, the 10 Fold, whatever they want to call it. Because there's a lot, obviously, there's everything's rumor until you actually hear it straight for what's going to be the actual device or the hardware that comes out. Obviously, there is saying that pretty much. Hopefully, one of the obviously I didn't try the Pixel. I used the Fold 6, but I wanted to get the 9 Pro Fold. But the only reason it kind of deterred me was at the end of the day was that front screen. It was that bezels were kind of big. Obviously the Samsung Fold 6. The little skinny screen was not the best either for someone with big hands like myself to use, but I was able to use it. Like I said, the only reason I got kind of over it and ended up coming back to the S25 Ultra was because obviously that screen camera. Like I said, that time the Fold 6 didn't have it had a 50 megapixel camera, but like I said, it doesn't mean because you throw a 50 megapixel camera is going to solve all the issues. You still need software. You need everything else to work with it. And then in that case, you had the S25 Ultra that 200 megapixels obviously, but they upgraded some other aspects of their camera and they optimized the software, and then it's really good camera. Obviously, this time Fold 7, like I said, you've seen early reviews, people saying it's a good camera. 200, obviously 200 megapixels is the same poly camera as this Fold 7, but like I said, they only upgraded one camera. They could have upgraded all three. Like I said, Samsung is always like I said, they want to give a little piece of the cake, but they want to give the whole cake. They maybe Fold 8, like I said, in Fold 8, you're hearing that they're going to bring back the pen again, S Pen, and they're going to bring back all these other features they took out from the Fold 7. And you never know, might bring back the 200 megapixel camera and upgrade the ultra wide, because we saw that on the on this one, the S25 Ultra and the Pixel. They upgraded the ultra wides. They added that new 48 megapixel, 50 megapixel ultra wide. So that's going to be another. You don't be surprised if you hear that on the next Fold 8. That they're upgrading the camera. They would say they're upgrading the camera, but what they really mean is just upgrade the ultra wide. Because that Apple did that too. You know, Apple for the longest didn't have, they had the same megapixels. But like I was going back to the holding off because I always know the same thing. Like people always say, you know, you buy on the hype or you buy, you know, like they say, you got to pay to play. You know, same thing with the Fold 7. A lot of people are going to buy the Fold 7 or pre-order because it's the Fold 7 and they want to get it. You know, obviously Samsung has good trading deals pretty much all for straightforward. Honestly, the trading deals are always depending on what you have, you know. This one, if I were to trade in right now, I'd get 1,000 off on the Fold 7. But I'm like, I still got to add, you know, like I said, you still got to add money to it. You know, you got to pay more, like I said. And then, like I said, it took away the S Pen. Like I said, it's not a deal breaker to take away the S Pen, but my ideal situation for me was, you know, to use the Fold 7 as a primary device and have my iPhone as a secondary, because I could use the Fold 7's interior screen better, you know, to, you know, which makes sense, you know, edit photos, not edit, you know, just have it, you know, have that feature to, you know, if you wanted to tweak around photos or video, you have the option to do it. You know, it's always good to have options. But unfortunately, it took it off. So I think that's another reason I'm waiting for the Pixel Fold 10. But we all know that in the Pixel Fold 10, they might not even do that too. You know, Pixel's never had a, you know, a pen. You know, like the people said, people say, oh, you'll buy these capacitive pens on Amazon and whatever, you know, on eBay, whatever. These, you know, but remember what did Samsung do? They took out that layer of the screen, that capacitive whatever, to use an actual pen. So even if you do get one of those Amazon plans or whatever, you don't have that same features as in this phone, where you actually have that screen technology that works with a pen. So obviously, and then, you know, you don't have to worry about the palm rejection and all that stuff. You won't have that on the Fold 7 because it doesn't have the same technology anymore. Obviously, Pixel never had it, so it's not. So I don't assume Google to do that, but obviously Google's where their big thing is their software, you know. And like I said, I guess everyone has their own flavor of software what they want to use. But you know, like I was talking about these small things like, you know, hold assist, all that. Let's go back. Features right here. Call assist, all that, scan detection, hold for me, direct my call, these features like that. And like I said, not only that, you know, their cameras are. Like I said, a lot of people are disappointed. Like I said, I didn't use the 9 Fold Pro, whatever you call it, 9 Pro Fold. But a lot of people weren't as, you know. Like I said, Google always every company could do better, but obviously a lot of people weren't impressed with their camera. You know, they're like, oh, you know, they could have done better with the camera hardware. But their software is pretty straightforward. You know, Google. Unless you're a professional, like I said, you need those professional, you know, photography, you know, quality photos on the phone. But like I said, even if you get a basic Pixel phone, like a A series, you can even make a case for those phones being better than an iPhone and a Samsung's camera. You know, and that's just the A series, you know. And those A series, you get rated as high, you know. Depending, like I said, some people don't like the rating systems of those websites, or people will rate the cameras. Everyone has their own, like I said, taste of photos or photographs or videos, how they want it to be. But yeah, that's the only reason I want to wait, because I want to see what their camera hardware is going to be. And obviously, a lot of people are talking about the software. You know, people are talking about how they're going to bring DeX. You know, DeX. It's too big to show on the screen, but I have this big boy right here. I'm sorry about that. You might not even see that. It's too big. This is the Galaxy Tab S10 Ultra. I have that. And DeX works cool. It's pretty interesting. DeX is pretty cool. Obviously, DeX has been out for a while. Obviously, a lot of people are like, well, that, you know, that's a killer feature, and you know, Google and Apple are missing out. It's a cool feature. Don't get me wrong. It's a good. But the same thing, like, it goes back to what, like, an iPad OS. It's not a laptop. You can somewhat get away with some of stuff, obviously minimal tasks, but it's not a full laptop, you know, replacement. You know, there's certain things, you know. You can see some of these videos online. A lot of people are like, oh, you know, I could do pretty much all my work that I need to do on DeX. I'm like, yeah, it's cool to have. It's always good to add. Like I said, it's always good to add, as long as it's not, you know, do anything bad to this hardware or anything like that, where you're sacrificing, you know, certain things. It's better to have more than less, you know. And I'm hoping Google, you know, like I said, Google's going to add that feature to their next Fold series. and they're going to hopefully, like I said, it doesn't sound like they're gonna upgrade the camera hardware that much. They might do one or two tweaks to it, but I'm hoping they fix that front screen. Front screen. Another thing I heard, like I said, like I said, it's just rumors. No one knows anything until we actually see it. August 20th here in the U.S. Obviously, everyone's depending where they're gonna get theirs or release date. That front screen, and a lot of people are talking about the pricing. A lot of people think that they're gonna undercut Samsung a little bit. And it might be true, might not, and that could be, that could be a big thing for Samsung, if Google's able to undercut them a little bit, and like I said, going back to undercutting is, we all know what these phones, even Samsung phones, they're almost like, for real, these phones are almost like any phone you could say. People even could say that about iPhone if you want to, but more likely with these two phones. These two phones, their value goes down. If you look on Swapper right now, they don't have the same value. That's why they give you all these trade-in offers and the high trade-in offers, because they know that inflated. The prices are inflated. Because we all know, for the most, like I said, it could be different every year. I have a feeling when the Fold 7 comes out, give it a couple days, you'll start seeing on Swapper. Obviously, from what retails for $2,100 right now here in the U.S. Give it a couple of days or a week, and we'll swap, and you'll start seeing these phones on brand new for $1,500 or less on Swapper and some online website. Because the phones don't hold their value, that's the thing, and that's one reason I'm kind of contemplating to give pre-ordering it, because I'm like, I could wait, a couple. I don't, the FOMO you need on the spot. I could wait, probably get even a mint, a lightly used one, because if a lot of people forget, I had to look it up the other day too, and that's one reason I'm like, I'll probably just wait. I don't know when they started doing it, but Samsung now, for example, you have here in the US, like I said, it's all dependent. US, if you return a Z Fold series phone, there's a restocking fee now. Before I didn't have that, so before people would be like, oh, yeah, cool, try it out for 2 weeks, or whatever the time frame, and before you're sending your trade in, and you could decide there if you want to keep the phone or not. But that's changed now. Now they have a restocking fee. Let's see, pull it up. Samsung restocking fee. Yeah, so they brought a restocking fee to the Z series only. Obviously, on the S series, you could, for the most part, like I said, I'm aware of, you could return the S series phone. Oh, here you go. See, so right here it says right here. So it says right here, 5% restocking fee applies to certain devices. Okay, so see right here it says, the only exception is the 5% restocking fee is the A and S series phone. So if you get an S series phone right now from, let me zoom in a little bit. Let's see, so that's on the screen. Yeah, right there. Right there in the bottom it says S and A series phones. You don't get that restocking fee. But Z series, Z Flip or Z Fold, you like after 2 weeks, you're like, nah, it's not for me, or nah, you know what, I'll keep my S25 Ultra, or I'll keep whatever trade in, I'll just hold on. You have to suck up that 5% loss. But some people might say, oh, just 5%. They say Best Buy does it and stuff like that. But that was a cool feature to have before. Like I said, everyone's has their own opinion, and if that's good or bad. I always think it's good to have the option of doing it. But obviously, companies lose money when you return a phone and they have to sell it as used. Like I said, there's something you hear sometimes that these companies end up just repackaging them and selling them new again, and people get them like, oh, why is it used? But yeah, that's one thing to keep an eye out. That's why I'm like, I could wait, give it a couple of days or a week, and you start seeing them on Swapper, because we see every phone for the most part, every Android phone for the most part, even someone, like I said, Apple's a little more with the value, they'll hold the value a little longer, a little better. But for the most part, in Android phones, you'll see that they lose their value off the bat. Give it a couple of days from the announcement, and you start seeing that that value go down. But like I said, the only good thing about Samsung phones, when you get a pre-order, you get all these extra deals, or extra like double storage. You won't get, or you get the extra incentive to trade in. So they give you a better trade in for your phone. But then some people I've read too that after the fact, like you give it a month or two, and which I feel in is always, is all strategic. Like give it a couple of weeks when the Pixel comes out, the next series Pixels come out, and you wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if you see Samsung bring back a top trade-in offer for the phones again, because they want to compete with the Pixel 10 series. Same thing when September comes around, when Apple releases the next iPhone. Same thing. That's when usually the trade-ins come back in. And then Google, the same thing. Google, when they're used, like I said, Google doesn't have good trade-in because they don't even. If I remember correctly, last year they didn't want to even give a good trade-in for their own old. They didn't to trade up to the Pixel 9 from a Pixel 8. They didn't want to even give a good value for that. So Google's never been it's a hit or miss with their trade-in process. Not their process, but their values of what they evaluate phones. Their main goal is to get people out of iPhones. So that's what usually iPhones are the phones they get, for the most part, the better trade-in value. But it's weird because this year, give me a second. For this year, the you look on Samsung side, I have a 16 Pro, iPhone 16 Pro, and I was like, oh cool, let me see what I get for this phone, trade-in value, and you'd be surprised. They actually, you could say it's okay for the value, $600. Obviously, Swappa they go for, you were to look for a 16 Pro right now, probably $750. Obviously, you got to take out the fees and all that, eBay nonsense fees and all that. It's almost like you could get away with, depending on the condition of your phone. It's always depending on the condition of your phone. Say I could probably sell it on Swappa with all fees and everything, walk out with $700, or give it to Samsung for $600. But like I said, Google, for some reason, most part, Google will give you better value in their iPhone compared to anything else. So that's why, it's interesting. And we all know Apple doesn't like to give anything for Android phones. Apple will give you, they will say the S25 Ultra will give you like $200. That's just an exaggeration. But Apple will give better trade-in value on their own hardware. But this all, like I said, is all dependent, because if you're in a carrier plan or whatever here in the United States, you go T-Mobile will give you $1,000, but obviously trading credits, and then obviously you have to have like the Super Magenta Ultra plan or whatever they call it now. I can't even keep up with the plans either. They keep changing it like every 5 months to a different Ultra or Plus or some Magenta thing. Same thing with AT&T. They'll give you the good trading credit, but you need to have the top. Well, let me take a step back. For the most part, if I remember correctly, AT&T is the only carrier I will tell you that doesn't do that, which is kind of good. But obviously, AT&T has their own issues where they lock the phone. And they're known for bloatware on Android phones. They're bloatware. Same thing with Verizon, bloatware. That's why a lot of people don't like getting carrier phones, because of bloatware. This is obviously a Pixel from T-Mobile. I got this one from T-Mobile. But there's obviously Pixel phones are known to not have bloatware, but even from an it's a carrier. But if you get like an S25 Ultra from AT&T or Verizon, I know even T-Mobile has a little more toned down in their actual bloatware. But AT&T, they have all these. Oh my God, yeah, that's all the active armor, or active this. I don't know about Verizon exactly, but for the most part, AT&T is really infamous for that, for having all this extra nonsense hardware on it. I mean, not hardware, extra software on it that's unnecessary. Bloatware, like they say. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Obviously, the iPhone don't want, for some reason, like I said, that everyone's waiting for the foldable from iPhone, because we all know when Apple comes out with a foldable, they're gonna say they're the first ones to do it. Even though we're already on the Fold A, they're at people, they're gonna say Apple's the first to do this or something. But don't get me wrong, Apple sometimes they wait for a while to do things. Sometimes because they kind of might be a little hesitant, because this foldable technology has its it's still going through its phases. We see, the technology is still evolving. From year to year, we're getting a different glass technology on it. We see on some of the Chinese phones, they have a different hinge and mechanism compared to Samsung or even the Google, how they do things. Yeah, so the technology is it's still changing for foldables. Obviously, flip phones too. We see Motorola do different things with their flip phones compared to Samsung. And obviously, like I said, I don't keep up with the foreign phones as much, but we see obviously Apple and the companies in the other markets, they have different ways of doing technology and their cameras and stuff like that. But yeah, when Apple does it, they're it's gonna be a good phone. Obviously they're gonna have to have the software with it. You know, it's almost the same thing with their iPads. You know, for the iPads for the longest, even like I said, I haven't keep up with iPads, but that's the reason I use. I don't get me wrong, the iPad Pros are really good iPads. But it's the screen. You know, obviously, first of all, the aspect ratios are it's really silly. The aspect ratio compared to like the tabs, Samsung tabs. Obviously, but the only thing about the Samsung tabs, they don't have all the same apps. You know, the apps is, you know, you have small apps, but they're not optimized as good as Apple apps. But obviously, you have Dex, you know, things like that. But everything has pros and cons, like I was telling you earlier, for the most part between these phones. But yeah, when Apple comes out with their foldable, it's going to be interesting to see, you know, how the software, you know, how locked down. It's just going to be a bigger, and I'm going to say it might be a bigger iPhone, you know, or are they going to add some sort of feature, or might add a, you know, here's a pencil pro feature, or, you know, something, you know, because you never know, you know, what if, you know, they do that, and, you know, Samsung's like, oh shoot, we took out the pen from our Z Fold, or, you know, whatever, whenever, and we have to bring it back now. And it's gonna be interesting, you know. Like I said, it's good to bring competition. And I'm surprised Apple hasn't done it. You know, they keep saying Apple's gonna come out with their foldable, you know, this and that, but they haven't done it yet. And we never know. Like I said, they might not even be interested in that market because they're doing so well with their slab phones. Now, obviously, I'm not gonna say they're doing so well. It's kind of either, you know, you could say in the last couple of years, it's kind of died down their sales or their adoption rate of phones, but they're good with the iPhone. And, you know, honestly, they make money other ways. You know, they have all these subscriptions things people pay for, and that's how they make money too. You know, not just straight hardware. A lot of software they sell as well. Like I said, today's world, we have a lot of, you know, even when these two phones, you have what, Gemini. Obviously, you got it for free on this one, but if I didn't get it for free, I would try it out, but I wouldn't pay the fees they want now for these Gemini. Don't get me wrong, Gemini is really good. Like I said, I'm not into the AI stuff, but Samsung has their own version of AI. But some of their, like I said, it's kind of interesting because I like their AI editing photos a little better compared to Google's good. Don't get me wrong, which is interesting because Google is always, like I said, photos is Google. You know, their software, you know, how they optimize things, or, you know, algorithm wise do things. It's good, but for some reason there's certain things, like when I was editing photos and I was using some of the AI, like I said, the AI features. Little things that were Samsung had little better advantages than the actual Google in themselves. But obviously I'm using an iPhone to record as a Apple AI. I haven't really used it. I've always been a Google person. That's why I use everything. Like I said, Google search, even on my iPhone, Google search, Google. I have a Gemini on my iPhone too. So I've always been more of a Google operating system. I like it. It's more it's something I've been comfortable with, but obviously Google has its own, you know, issues with that because they tend to cancel a lot of things, you know, a lot of their own apps they use, and they're known for that, you know. But yeah, that's the only thing coming back to that. I have to close it off with the folding. It'll be interesting. Like I said, the Fold 7, I really want to get it. I wouldn't try it, but something about me is just telling wait for the Pixel, make your choice there, because then, I guess everyone made their minds up. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, you know, Samsung is either Samsung or not. You know, Samsung's depending, like I said, depending where you're at. You know, the United States, we're pretty much limited to Samsung and Google because OnePlus, they didn't make a foldable this coming up. Obviously, I didn't try the last foldable, but it looked nice. You know, like I said, the hardware's there, but obviously they make a new foldable. And obviously, we're waiting for Apple to see if they do one. Obviously, because we all know if Apple does it, everyone's going to buy the Apple foldable, whatever they call it. It'd be interesting. But yeah, I'm waiting for the Google one because for some reason, like I said, I prefer the Google software a little bit more. The Pixel. Oh, Gemini active for some reason. The Pixel software, especially right now, you know, this. If you remember from the old Nexus days, you know, there's always been one of those things, you know, the Nexus hardware or the OG Android hardware, you know, it's something special. Obviously, I'm hoping they build upon their software. They add little things. The camera, obviously, I hope they improve the camera. Like I said, I didn't try the last Fold, but pretty much, you know, if it's using an A series camera, for example, A series camera could beat a lot of cameras, top tier cameras. Obviously, in today's world, you know. But I'm hoping to improve the hardware because that's what I want. Obviously, they're saying there's going to be a new chip in it. hopefully that's a better chip. Ideally, same thing. Like I said, if I could, if I could change something about it, and I probably would, change it, and I probably would, like I said, it's hit or miss. Add a take the Tensor chip out and bring back Qualcomm to it. Bring back Qualcomm chip. Obviously not for I don't care about the Geekbench score and all that. Just that Qualcomm's gonna smooth, is gonna breeze through all these hardware. Like I said, no issue with the Tensor chip. It's breezing through everything, but you can tell a little difference. But yeah, that would be the perfect Pixel phone. They brought back that Qualcomm chip. I see every company wants to improve because one day you never know. What if Google one day is the next Apple with their chips? They're the top dog. They're the top chip maker and stuff like that. But I guess that's like you say, you gotta do trial and error. One day might not. You know what? Tensor chip was a failure. We don't like every other Google project. We're just gonna cancel. We're gonna just buy Qualcomm again, or they buy someone else. They go through to someone else to buy their chips. But yeah, that's coming back to the Fold and these two phones. Every phone has pros and cons. Obviously, when the Fold 10 comes out for Google, it's gonna have its pros and cons. And people are, they're saying it's gonna have a bigger battery. Like I said, in the Fold 7, a lot of people are surprised. Some people are upset. Some people are, They're saying, how come they bring the technology here? Everything has pros and cons. The reason probably they bring technology, and there's stories behind why they bring that new technology. I don't know what's called exactly, that battery technology to the Fold 7, but there's a reason behind it. Obviously, people could say it's just Reed or Samsung is, but yeah, supposedly the Fold 10 is supposed to bring a bigger battery and a little better features, stuff like that. But we'll see. Like I say, until we see actual time and the day and the release and people have it, that's when people can make the choice. And that's where I'm pretty much leaning towards to waiting for that to make my choice, because if I were to leave one of my iPhone. It's either the Fold 7 or it might be the Pixel 10, because like I said, I used this phone as my primary for a couple of weeks and I really liked it. Like I said, obviously the only reason I went back to iMessage. iMessage, and some people are gonna say, oh, it's just there's WhatsApp and all this, but iMessage has been kind of one of those cemented things but I could probably get away with it, if I went back to the Pixel. But if I use, to me, I want a foldable, because don't get me wrong, it's good to have this. But it's good to have a foldable because, it doesn't make a difference when you go out or you go travel, you don't want to bring a tablet with you and stuff like that. You have a 2-in-1. But if I could get most of the good features and a good solid camera, obviously good hardware, because, you want good hardware too. You don't want it to overheat and stuff like that, where you can use it all day without no issue. That's why I want to see what the Pixel 10 brings, the Pixel 10 Fold brings, because that might be the phone that makes me switch from my iPhone to that. Because the Samsung is good, don't get me wrong. Like I said, I want to see both of them. It's better to have both, and then that's when you make your choice. And then obviously the S25. Right now, this is the top dog. S25 Ultra. You can't go wrong with the S25 Ultra. It has pretty much everything thrown at it, like Samsung used to do. You have all the top cameras. You can't go wrong with it. It has all the features. Screen, beautiful screen. That's, like I said, the Samsung. I'm surprised they didn't bring it to the Fold series, but their anti-glare screen, reflective screen, whatever you want to call it, it's the top thing. But yeah, we'll see. And yeah, next video I'll try to make one probably compare them on the iPhone instead of with the Samsung. Yeah, with the Pixel, because like I said, the Pixel software is the more software that people, and I think I read somewhere that if someone today were to swap from an iPhone to an Android phone, they were most likely switch to a Pixel phone. And I don't know, because of bags, back in the day, people used to say, oh, Samsung phones are laggy and stuff like that, or they used to. There's something behind this, what a lot of iPhone users tend to believe, that the Samsung, not just, a lot of people think Samsung is Android, and people don't forget that. Like I said, Apple people think that that every company has their own software, but it's not true. The people think Samsung OS is Samsung has their own version, that's why it's lagging. But Pixel uses its own software, that's not as laggy. But yeah, I was reading that obviously iPhone users tend to switch to Pixels more frequently than the Samsung phone, because I guess like I said, the OS is not exactly like an Apple OS, but it's pretty much fluid, pretty straightforward, nice and organized, and people with the iOS phone could feel a little more comfortable using it. Obviously, if they don't like it at all, then they're going back to an iPhone a couple months later or a couple days later. But yeah, I'll try to do a video next on that Apple against Apple OS or whatever they call it, iOS versus Google OS stock. What is obviously is as stock as it gets. Google OS, because those are the more common. And if I do get a foldable, I'll probably do a video one of those. Obviously not an unboxing video because those are kind of done now. No one we know what these boxes carry. There's just a phone and paper. There's no actual video to. But yeah, if it comes around, probably do a video on it. Just to show. But yeah, that's what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for the. Most likely gonna wait for the Pixel 10 and to make my choice between that one and the Fold series, Fold 7. And obviously by that time, you never know. Might be a little bit better trading value. Might be the same. Might be worse. But if you get it right now, you have good deals going on for Samsung. So take advantage of your deals. Look for the best. Obviously, whatever works for you at the end of the day. If you carry 2 phones and you carry different like me, cool, that works. Because if you only carry 1 phone and that's it, there's where you have to decide what you feel comfortable using. Especially, obviously, like I said, there's more to it. Not just the phones. You have, in this case, like me, I have the smartwatch, or you might have an iPad or computer. But there's people who use a MacBook and they have an S25 or Fold, or there's people who use a gaming laptop, or they have a PC, a full 5070 or 9080. Correction, not 9080. 9070 XT graphics card in their home, and they use iPhone. So it's just preference, and that's a good thing. It's always good to have choices, because it's almost like a car, not the perfect. Everyone has a preference of vehicle, model, make, engine type, what they want the car to do and not do. What they feel comfortable with the car. Same thing with the phone. Obviously, phones are different technology, but it's pretty. Always pick the phone that you're gonna feel comfortable with, because at the end of the day, you're wasting your money and you're the ones gonna pay the bill for it, or you're gonna stay with the phone for a year, or might stay with the phone for 7 years. But yeah, we'll just cut the video off right here. And thanks for watching, guys. If you are watching the video, thank you. Have a good day. Bye.